And we're covering what's in your backpack for those of you who have missed out on ever since Easter. But Easter was the kickoff of where I said it's time. It's time for us to quit playing small. It's time for us to hide behind the truth of who we are. And it's time to put ourselves out there to the world, to our family, and to quit playing small and claiming your powers that you were born with. Now, many of you, I think, got the handout, and that's the picture of the 12 powers and the location where Charles Fillmore placed these powers. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about these location of the powers. I'll mention it, but there's much more depth that Charles Fillmore talked about. My goal is to take Kathy's version of the 12 powers, simplify it so that maybe you will own them and remember them and use them. Because if you activate these 12 powers, there is nothing that will hold you back. Nothing. So I started on Easter telling you guys it's time. It's time to shake it up. It's time to go. You know, Easter was time, and I said we're out of the tomb, and that it's time for us to show up in a bigger way. And I talked to you about, and these are all on Facebook, and these are on our Facebook page. All of these talks are on YouTube, and we talked a lot about the Christ, and that the Christ that we talk about is living in the superconscious mind, living from your spiritual awareness. So when we talk about the Christ presence and the Christ within, that's what we're talking about, that Christ that Jesus knew and lived from. And so it is living from your spiritual awareness versus your material awareness. So I've called this series, What's in Your Backpack? And, before I do that, before I even go into that, I want to tell you a little bit of story. But I will say that we're on the third week of these powers, and I'm covering 3 every week. So the first week we covered faith, strength, and wisdom. So remember, these are spiritual powers that reside in you, and they don't mean anything unless you activate them. So faith, strength, and wisdom. Last week we covered love, power, and imagination. And this week we're going to cover understanding. Oh, yes. I wanted to make sure. Power last week was imagination, because that's going to tie into what I'm talking about today. Understanding. Will, which goes with understanding, and the power of order. So I'm so used to having both my hands free here. Oh, goodness, excuse me. So after my first talk that I did on faith, strength, and wisdom, my daughter was watching on Facebook, and I saw her comment. After service, I review the Facebook post. And I saw my daughter Christy's post, and she's like, OMG, Mom, I need to learn about these and share them. Now, it was just the first 3 powers I talked about. And Christy works with people experiencing homelessness in Newport and Covington area of Kentucky. And she's been doing that probably most of her work life. And she has a group called the PSG group, and that stands for Parents Support Group. And I would say 50%, if not more, of these women are experiencing or have experienced or possibly looking at experiencing homelessness with themselves and their children. And Christy said, Mom, we meet next Monday on Zoom. Would you come into our group and talk about these 12 powers? And it made me realize, oh my gosh, these powers are way more than a unity teaching. These powers are for everybody to learn and empower yourself to go in your daily life. And I got to tell you, I don't know how we did it, but in probably 55, maybe we went a little over an hour, I somehow covered all 12 of those powers with these women. They were taking notes, and by the end of it, we had gotten to where I had touched on that there is a little 4-year-old inside of each and every one of them. Once in a while, I touch on that here and remind you, there is a 4-year-old inside of you, a 4-year-old little girl or a 4-year-old little boy that is screaming out. Because that little girl or little boy, when you came into this world, you innately knew that you had these powers. Does not a child from newborn until about school age feel very powerful? How many have raised children and those young kids really can run the house? Yes. Oh boy. And sometimes they're even 28 and they're still running the house. But truly, it is about realizing that these women all then, the next week, went and tried to find pictures of themselves as a small child, and they've all sent them in, and now they've made a poster together, and now they're changing the PSG group to POW. By the time I got off that screen, they were like, POW, Parents of Wisdom. And I'm like, oh, yes, I'm telling you, they need an applause. If we were in drive-in church, I'd say, give them a hallelujah, because it's the truth. These are people who nobody's ever empowered them with anything. And to be able to leave that, I'm like, we are on to something here about these 12 powers. And what is in your backpack? You were born with a backpack, and I look right now at someone that in 4 weeks is going to be bringing a baby into this world. We're going to have another Schmoiser lineage here. We're going to have to build another pew, an extension on that pew. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm so glad, Sydney, you're here, because that baby is empowered. That baby is already empowered, and you are. But we forgot. Our world doesn't remind us of this. So I'm going to just quickly cover on will and order, and actually understanding and will. So understanding is having spiritual understanding. This is a big power, and I need to be called to that constantly. I need to be called to that this morning, because the way my week has gone with church, it has been extremely demanding emotionally, mentally, and physically. And it takes a toll on my husband, Michael. And so by last night, we were hardly speaking to each other. And I'm like, this morning, I'm like, I've got to get into the spiritual power of understanding. I need to have understanding of how it must feel to be him dealing with me and my work life. Because I'm just in such movement, that I forget what it must be like to watch me running around the house, headset on, walking through, talking to congregants. No, I think we should move that plant. You want to move the plant? I don't care. Okay, who have we got? What's the sound system? Are we working that out? I mean, and then getting calls of people making their transition on Saturday. Somebody is very close to transitioning. Can you imagine what Michael has to deal with? He needs a sympathy card. Honest to goodness. The guy really does. So when you can move to understanding, spiritual understanding, in times where there's this clash. Now, understanding isn't any good unless you draw on the power of will, because will is the one that will activate and move your understanding forward. So you literally, they're both the same. If you notice it, back of the head, same spot, because you cannot have one without the other. Understanding isn't going to do anything if you don't use your will and direct that forward. Does that make sense? I'm touching on these very quickly because of time today, because I definitely want, and did I say, yes, did I use the right one where it will? Oh my goodness, understanding and will, okay? Understanding and will sit back here, and it takes spiritual understanding, and it takes you having the will to direct that forward. The last power is order, and order is something that I want to read to you really quickly. Order, for most of you, you know this, divine order. We claim divine order all the time, don't we? And you know what? I'm going to forget the reading because of time. Divine order. Divine order doesn't always look pretty, does it? As I look around and I look at these balloons, and I also know that at the time that these people were making their transition, there was always the question, how can this be divine order? How can this be divine order? And we have to claim order. Order doesn't always look pretty. Order does not mean that you're going to feel like you can't make it through another day. And I look at some of your faces, and I know, because I've talked with you, when you have felt that way. And it's not easy. Divine order is not always easy, but there is a divine plan, and we have to wait that out. And sometimes it doesn't happen. I know the way the book described it, it was beautiful. Divine order is like the power of order is like a stage manager directing a Broadway show. And all of a sudden somebody picks up, phone rings on stage. We don't even think about it. But the stage manager made sure that there was a phone on the stage and made sure that the phone rang at the certain time that it was supposed to. Okay? We could go on with that, but divine order means that there is a higher order. And that does not mean that people don't make their transition. It does not mean that people don't get diagnoses. It does not mean that you are involved in a fatal accident, such as me. It doesn't mean that that's not going to happen, that there's not divorces, there's not firings, there's not. This is called Earth School, and it's called Earth School for a reason, because we're here to learn, and we're here to learn and trust and lean on each other. So I just want to close with that. When we claim divine order, how do we say that? Don't we say that in our divine order expressed through me? We're actually going to get to say that for our blessing. So with that, I'm going to close for today, because I'd rather have another song, and I'd rather bless our love offerings and bless our life and bless our family. You know, I look around and I see John, Big John is with us. His spirit never left this church. And Cindy, you are with us. And I look around at Sharon Fisher and Mary Miller's balloon, and I see Alex. And I know you know that your grandma and great-grandma are always with you. In case you didn't hear that, he said, oh yeah, every time I make a wrong choice, they're like saying, what are you doing, you, oh, I can't say the word he used. That was her favorite word. You baby ASS. And just like Yvonne Schmoiser, we know she's watching over that new grandbaby that's coming. And we've got Larry Langdon, who, oh my gosh, there's Sandy made it just in time as we were honoring and thinking about Larry and trusting divine order. And I watched Sandy go through that as well. She knows divine order. She didn't like what was happening, but she knows her life is in divine order. Nancy, your brother, Terry, you know, his spirit is still in that pew, and Amy Gages' spirit is still in this pew. They don't leave, do they? They just let go of their body. So with that, I say namaste. It is so good to be back. The Christ's presence in me no longer has to look at you in your cars. That the Christ presence in me truly sees and honors that Christ's presence within each and every one of you. And I want to acknowledge Nicole and Marielle for getting these balloons and writing on them and setting them up. Thank you. Thank you.